The first thing I remember about that event was that I had never seen assembled in one place that many Mexicans. I'd never seen us as a group. I never understood the power. I mean, this is a common experience today, but then the idea that that assembly was an exhibition of our strength and of our commonly held position was overwhelming.
That was incredible to see that, you know, the amount of people and the energy and the things, you know, never had I seen, you know, the whole barrio reverberate with that Chicano power, Chicano. It was awesome. We got to the park, we began to congregate. There had been some people up on stage talking. I think Alurista had said a few words, Corky had said something.
But we had grandmothers there, we had kids. We expected to celebrate and protest at the same time. So I think that the feeling of the crowd, the atmosphere, the ambience was very much like a fiesta.
Then all of a sudden, from over in that direction, we started hearing pops, and we started hearing people behaving erratically and moving back this way. The cops were armed with the gas guns they were shooting. They already had their masks on, and the wind was at their back, so all that was coming towards us. In front of the stage, school buses had unloaded kids.
You know, you see all of these people running and kind of just a chaos emerging out of the park. And you see the tear gas coming and things being tossed and bottles being thrown. Everybody was, you know, putting water onto their eyes.
And then it went real crazy. Those children that every good teacher says, if anything happens, run to the bus, get in the bus. The children were trapped in the buses, and the buses were filling up with gas. That's all there was in Laguna Park.
I mean, I saw grandmothers in their bus with a tear gas going into the bus, and they're choking inside of a bus. Tear gas is not like TV. Tear gas will send you to the ground.
I saw people running into the girls' bathroom, taking kids in there, getting them out of the way of any gunfire, which was what everybody was thinking about. The police were going to start shooting.
It was a well-planned operation. The way that they were already prepared to move was an indication that they had this pretty well planned out.
So I felt terrified and emboldened. I felt more willing to fight because we could clearly see the injustice operating in the physical world. And I knew what we had to fight. It was clear what we had to fight.
How we were seen and how we perceived the world was such a given. It was such a taken for granted. You know, we knew that there were things that were out of our reach. Things like high school, that was out of the question. By that time, you're old enough to work, so you need to help the family. We knew that once we reached a certain age, we'd go to work. So there was no aspiration to take classes that were going to prepare us for anything other than work in the fields.
I grew up with a lot of discrimination and racism, even though we're in South Texas, it was still very prevalent, and had to deal with a lot of it in the public school system also. Power structure in Kingsville was white, and it was white for quite a long time. There was a lot of discrimination. I remember my father telling us about coming home from World War II, still dressed in his naval uniform and having encountered discrimination, being refused service at a restaurant.
The kind of racism that existed to me is, to some degree, I think, analogous to what was happening also in the South. In other words, my grandmother taught me, without actually saying, that if white people were coming towards us, to hush our conversation and sort of scoot over to one side or the other of the sidewalk. She was teaching me to minimize our presence so that they wouldn't notice and they wouldn't bother us.
In the public schools, in elementary school, we were punished for speaking Spanish, physically punished for speaking Spanish. So you're made to feel ashamed, and we were not allowed to speak Spanish anywhere on the school grounds or in the classrooms.
I was a monolingual Spanish-speaking child, and on the first day of school, I was greeted with a very negative response. I was actually asked to wear what resulted in a dunce cap that had the word Spanish implanted on it. I was forced to wear that. I was told until I would learn to speak English. This was also during a time period when corporal punishment was allowed, and corporal punishment was extremely abused, and it was not uncommon for students to be beaten, slapped from junior high all the way through high school.
The Anglo Society in some way made us feel ashamed of our heritage. When we used the word Mexican, we used it with pride. When they used it, they always used to say it, dirty Mexican, poor Mexican, lazy Mexican.
I think the majority of Chicanos were expected not to excel, were seen as problems. Were often in the school setting identified as either cholas, what was some of the tamale hoppers, taco stompers, I mean, all kinds of really pejorative terms and terminology.
And so you had all these labels that were placed upon us and had a big effect on us.
Well, the most obvious issues that were being discussed was the violence against the Mexicanos and the farm workers, anybody who wasn't the right color was subject to being arrested, to being, beat up by the Rinches, the Texas Rangers.
In Texas, the Texas Rangers were like the #1 bad guys, and they were responsible for a lot of injustices to Mexicanos in Texas. And that goes back to, they were the top guns, and they just, a Mexican is a Mexican, and had no value, so let's hang him up, kind of thing. But it was still going on in the 70s. I mean, we saw them in Crystal City specifically.
And then also the other issues that were being discussed was education. I knew from my own experience, having grown up being punished for speaking Spanish and so on, that there was inequalities with the education.
We were directed toward the shop courses, wood shop, metal shop, auto mechanics. Your senior year, if you got that far, was a dead end. Maybe you would go to a junior college. But more than that, military was an option, a very viable option for most of the Chicano kids. Or prison, jails, or farm working. Many of my friends went on to just become farm workers, driving trucks out in the fields, or prison.
When I looked out into the world to see the images of our culture and of our people, they simply didn't exist. They didn't exist in magazine ads, and they didn't exist on the television. And I think that a failure to see ourselves in the larger society had profound impact on our self-esteem.
And you started to see that the images around you all dealt with the other people, with the Anglo kids. So you started to really look at yourself and compare yourself to the Anglo kids. Your mom would come to school, your dad would come to school to pick you up, and you were embarrassed that your dad looked that way, that the car was dirty, or that your mom couldn't speak English. That started to have an impact on my thinking about who I was. Almost sometimes wishing that I was not a Mexicano, a Chicano.
I suddenly realized that we were mistreated and that we had to do something about it to stop it and to change it and to try to get the word out and to share that understanding and knowledge with other young people.
wasn't until Cesar Chavez in the mid-60s developed that I started to see that and see that struggle, and that struggle was very inspiring because all of a sudden you see this humble man saying this is wrong to things that we knew were wrong. But we never spoke about, we never said anything. We just humildes, we just were quiet, never spoke up because we weren't supposed to. But here's this young man, Cesar Chavez, who's speaking out, who's talking about how horrible the conditions. He was talking about us, my family, people that I knew, and it was an incredible feeling. And I think that weight was lifted. All the things that I didn't like about myself, the things that I had been embarrassed about, the fact that my parents were farm workers, somehow had put a yoke around my neck. And I wasn't aware of it until I started to realize what was taking place, that Cesar Chavez was happening, till other students were talking about similar conditions and being proud that they were Mexicanos. All of a sudden, we started to look at ourselves in a whole different light.
And so when the Chicanismo came forth and I embraced it, I began to question myself as an artist. Who is an artist? What is an artist supposed to do? And for whom?
And I watched on the television, I saw things happening on the television, and I began to wonder and question what I was doing as an artist. What I saw there was a sense that there was massive numbers of us, that we had been silent, and that we were rising, and that we could make change. So I wanted my artwork somehow to match the time I was living in. I didn't want to be irrelevant.
All of a sudden, I'm in the middle of this revolution. And what does it all mean to me? I couldn't avoid it. I was there, right there. It was being impacted by my classmates. It was being impacted by my instructor. It was being impacted by society, by the news media, by everything. And I asked myself, whoa, I'm right here. And this is part of me. This is where I need to be.
It was at that point that I made the decision that no matter what it took from me, I was going to be a Chicana artist, no matter what, because there was this whole population of my people who were being unfairly treated. And if I could at least do this much with my artwork and use the artwork as a vehicle towards bringing about a greater understanding of who we are as a people, what our culture is, what our language is, our customs, our mannerisms, everything about our lives needed to be brought out in a fine art format.
The movement gave me a sense of identity. It gave me a source of energy. It inspired me.
The Chicano movement gave me the answer to this really pessimistic and very depressed experience I'd had of trying to make art.
Steered me in a certain direction. And in a sense, many of the other artists that called themselves Chicanos, we were all going down that same path. We were in this together. So this bonded me to a community.
As I felt for the first time in my life, I was needed, that art was useful, that it had a purpose, that it could serve, and it was radical.
Everything started to change in me. Even the guy that I worked for said, Malaquias, you no longer smile, you no longer seem happy here. And it wasn't that I wasn't happy, it's just that now I had something really serious in my mind that was so incredible. The notion that we could better the plight of our people, finally, that we had the tools, that we had the people to do it. And this was more important than showing at the Crocker Gallery or showing in Paris or New York.
We didn't have paintings or murals or lithos or drawings that documented our people and our daily lives, our celebrations, or I mean the whole spectrum of our characters, positive and negative.
As the movement progressed and we started to paint, and there were many of us painting on the streets, we started to talk to each other about what should be represented.
A lot of the discussions were, what kind of art were people making? It was like, should we go into the gallery system, or should we do like political murals? Should we work with the community?
Carlos Almaraz and I were living in New York, And we came back to LA in '69, and we eventually met Gilbert Lujan, and Gilbert Lujan introduced us to Roberto de la Rocha. And that comprised the Los Four group. And we got together and argued about being Chicano and what the hell that meant.
Here we had a group of artists that were talking about being Chicanos without apologies, talking about self-determination.
The talk was like, how do you avoid the tyranny of a Western European application? There were many discussions. And we had many organizations. I mean, there were the Concilio de Arte Popular, the Artes Visuales. I mean, we named ourselves different names, and we were searching for what was a true Chicano art.
Late 60s, a lot of the artists got together. We certainly did in the Bay Area, formed an organization called Malaefe, Mexican American Liberation Art Front. And the purpose for that organization, or that group of artists coming together, was just to discuss what is our role? What do we do as artists? What do we as artists do? And with plenty of discussions that went on about the role of the artist, how we would use our art, and who our art was going to be for.
I was living in Austin when I started to attend the Consafos gatherings, the Consafos, the Chicano artists led by Mel Casas.
And one major group in Texas, in San Antonio, called Consafos, that were artists, Chicano artists, that were actually decided to organize themselves to set goals and perspective for imagery that they were dealing with. My whole philosophy was that as an artist, your responsibility was that of a storyteller, to document, to record, to portray imagery that was relevant to a specific group of people.
It was the most natural thing for us to come out that our art would be for nuestra gente. And that at first, yes, there was ideas of getting into museums, trying to get into galleries. And then when those doors were shut to us, we realized, well, wait a minute, what are we doing trying to get into galleries? Why are we trying to get into museums?
The canon was definitely Eurocentric. I mean, I don't think I even knew there were Latino artists. I didn't even know yet about the Tres Grandes. That's how limited my education. I could tell you about Egyptian art, and I certainly knew about the Renaissance and medieval periods, but I knew nothing about Latino art.
Imagine being trained in the art schools to the degree that when you drew a figure, the figure was always white. Classic training in the arts trained your hand to racialize your figures toward Anglos. So even drawing a Chicano face was a radical act.
We were very cognizant of the fact that we needed new imagery. And the first exhibit, for La Causa, was
new symbols of La Nueva Raza. We wanted to create a certain identity, and we met for months discussing this issue.
In those meetings and up to that first exhibition, we talked about how many of us had felt about who we were. El Indio, La India, El Negrito, those names that we were called, and how terrible we felt. And all of a sudden, we're discussing about what beautiful people we are. We have to create an image of ourselves that we're going to be proud of. And we talked about, let's just put a face out there. And we said, well, what face? And there was a young man there who was a brown beret. He was a poet, Manuel Gomez, who is now the vice chancellor at UC Irvine. He used to come to these meetings, and he had a face like he had just been chiseled out of stone by some Mayan. Incredible face. So we said, well, let's take Manuel, and each one of us represent him in our own medium. So that first exhibition was an image of rooms full of images of Manuel Gomez, that now we were proud of who we were, that Indian side of us that we had denied, that we didn't want to admit that we had oftentimes been made ashamed of, was now something to look at and say, my God, we are a beautiful people.
The Chicano movement was a renaissance in thinking about ourselves and in creating those institutions and images and writings that reflected who we are. They were not existent at one time. We had nothing to relate to, but we had to make it up as we went along, and we did. I think that that was the road to a deeper understanding of who we are.
Well, when I got involved with Carlos Maras and John Valadez, they were working with a group, an art collective called Public Art Center. And the work that they did were murals and in the community. It was all about working with the community. And this thing about art for the people was also like art by the people, not just for them, but by them, inclusive. That's a really great thing about traditional mural painting, is that you really involve the community.
It was art for and by the people. So we embraced that philosophy. We embraced those styles. We emulated the styles of the great muralists of Mexico. We looked back to our indigenous past. And in doing so, we went beyond the Mexican muralists who primarily painted their artwork in public buildings. We took our art to the street.
And I didn't actually come to murals through the great Tres Grandes. I came to muralism by virtue of the writing on the street. And I remember specifically one piece of writing that was very influential. Somebody had scrawled in giant words, "I would rather live 1 year as a lion than 100 years as a lamb." And when I saw that, I thought, look at that. That is the most powerful thing. It's public. It's not on a canvas. Nobody owns it. And yet it's speaking to the community. And I thought that's what we should do. We should be making images that speak to the community.
The murals were really important for us as women muralists, as women painters, because it was uniting the community. It was talking to the community. It was painting paintings that were for everybody. It was taking the paintings out of the museum and putting them in the street.
Right away, we started looking for walls, and in those days, we knew nothing about it. We just get felt tip pens and spray cans, and
we would go and say, would you like a mural on the side of your wall? And most people would say, 95% would say, no, we don't. Once in a while, much to our surprise, people would say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
You know, there was talk about the murals as being the people's art, which of course it was. And of course, did we get paid? No. We painted those murals for free.
And so that raised to me the idea of, oh, art for the people. Art for the people. That was important to me because I was reconsidering all the myths I have learned about the fine artist. That you're elite and you're beyond, and you also turn your back on society. Well, the Chicano movement was the opposite of that. It made us look at society, get involved in society, and make images that were understandable by us, the artists ourselves, and also the folks in the neighborhood.
So not only was it art for the people in the places that they lived and worked, but it was an organizing tool. For me, it was a way of teaching young people about their culture, about history, about what they held in common, and in fact, even working with the ideas of what they could aspire to, or who they might want to be. So in a sense, we were painting people's dreams.
Well, Dreams of Flight, my first solo mural was, I said, I want to do something different than what was being put on walls at the time. I wanted to use an Aztec warrior. I wanted to do them different. So I had mine flying with actual wings as a mystical creature, flying to the moon, touching the moon. I thought I could reach kids with fantasy because I love comic books. I love flying. How can I illustrate that to other children? So I thought of the boy in the swing. He's dreaming.
This one is called Ghost of the Barrio. It was painted in 1974. It shows like some vatos hanging out on the front porch. It's sort of a trompe-l'oeil because people say, how did you paint that on the steps? It's not the steps, it's a blank wall of a housing unit. So it has a 3D trompe-l'oeil effect. Cholo type cats hanging out. On the side are ghost images of mestizos, of indigena, of revolutionaries. So it's sort of a where do we go from here type of visage. 1975, I went to a art show, a Chicano art show in Venice, and this tall guy comes up to me and says, "Hey, I know you."
Well, David and Wayne were in third grade together since kindergarten in East LA at Hubbard Street School. And we did our first mural together. It was open house, and actually it wasn't paint, but it was crayons and on butcher paper. So we drew our first mural.
20 years had passed to that moment when we got together. It's like, "Wait, what are you doing? You know, what's up?" And says, "Hey, I'm painting murals." And at the time, I'm going, "Hey, I'm painting murals." After all these years, we were both painting murals. So this was in June of '75, and that is the date that we mark as the start of the group East Los Streetscapers.
By the late 70s, there was a fairly developed Chicana sensibility, separate from the Chicano sensibility. Women had been through the ringers trying to, work with the guys and work with our men, and oftentimes were left out of things that they should have been included in.
Well, we were really frustrated. We wanted to be artists, but our male friends, our compadres, our boyfriends weren't interested in having us be part of the mural movement with them. So we had to find a way to discover ourselves, and we said, well, we're just as good. So Graciela and I tested the waters, and we did a mural in Palmi Alley. Right after that, we invited Consuelo and Irene and see if they wanted to do a big mural together. It was a really important mural, Panamerica, because it was the beginning of a real breakthrough. We didn't want to continue to copy the same kind of imagery that was being produced in Los Angeles.
Got involved with the Mujeres Muralistas initially by becoming part of an exhibit at Galeria de la Raza in 1973, Mujeres de Aztlan exhibit, the first women's exhibit. And I had a chance to meet Patricia and Graciela and Irene Perez. So I met them, and they asked me to get involved with them in some mural projects that they were doing here in the Mission District. We were interested in the here and now, and we were also interested in women in leadership positions. We were interested in the diversity that exists within the Latino community.
The Mujeres Muralistas created images that were very much dealing with the female figure, and we were giving the female much more importance in the overall community, in the overall society that was overlooked and not paid attention to.
What would happen was someone in the group would initiate, let's do this, and others would say, okay, let's go do it. I would initiate, let's do an instant mural. I'm interested in pushing the boundaries of a static medium and adding an element of performance to it, and something that doesn't last. And again, it was utilizing the element of muralism, but again, not staying in the realm of the traditional type of mural. It was, again, activating the piece.
Stations of the Cross took place on Christmas Eve of 1971. And Willie Herron had been trying on various costumes and makeup, and at some point we kind of simultaneously started to create the world's ugliest crucifix mixed with blood and mud and oil stains, because of course the previous year had just been sort of the riots on Whittier Boulevard, that we would take this cross down the street unannounced, dressed in full costume. I was dressed sort of as an altar boy, wearing a skull, an actual animal skull on my head, and then Gronk being dressed up as a sort of wearing a little green bowler cap.
And again, it was utilizing the element of muralism, but again, not staying in the realm of the traditional type of mural. It was again activating the piece.
And we carried it along the street without saying a single word. It was just the three of us, Willie, Gronk, and myself. The idea that we would wedge it into the entrance of the Marine recruiting station, which is what we did. And we blockaded the Marine recruiting station. We littered the floor, making the place unusable. And for that particular day, there would be no Chicanos that would join the Marines and go to Vietnam.
The strategy was to take your chances on the streets, to do it as quickly as possible, to get out of there before the police got wise to what you were doing. So these were kind of guerrilla hit and run kind of tactics. To do an instant mural, all you needed was a roll of tape, a roll of film, and two other people to be put up against a wall. And with $10, you created a piece that is still talked about today, the instant mural.
An ofrenda is a temporary offering to the dead that is ephemeral and it's time-related. An altar is the permanent, ongoing record of a family's cultural and spiritual history within the home. What attracted me to the altar, because my grandmother kept one and my mother in a different way kept one, was that women were in charge of them for the most part. The husbands might build them, but the women tended them.
I think they're an expression of people's love and concern for family. And they're a celebration of Chicano life. And Chicano is very interesting because, yes, we're Americans, but we still express ourselves in the ancient traditions.
Most traditional altars, there are, again, symbols that are really old, part of the old traditions, like the marigolds. The food would be offered to those who have passed away, toys if they're children, mementos, photographs. Photographs, I think, are just to remember that they had to bring back the memory of those who have passed away. That's what photos do.
You know, I always talk about memory as the bridge between the living and the dead, between the past and the present. Memory is the way, it's the power we have to never lose someone.
I live by the LA River and I go down and I cut the Mexican bamboo right out of the river and make an altarpiece and do it as part of my offering for Dia de los Muertos. And it's become very personal because of the death of Carlos Almaraz. It's just a beautiful expression of a Chicano idea.
I think the first generation of Chicano artists focused on Day of the Dead because it was the most direct way of reclaiming the past. In other words, we needed heroines and heroes. We needed a legacy. We needed to have a sense of our own inheritance. And there is nothing closer to that than the traditions of Days of the Dead.
I wanted to take that whole real traditional approach and switch it around to be more personal, very personal. I had a solo show at a gallery in Santa Monica, and it was called Here Lies, and it was 10 small coffins that were done on clapboard, and I asked 10 individuals to fill out a questionnaire about death. That was a different take on Day of the Dead, a sort of a more contemporary look at Day of the Dead, and asking people to really look at death, you know, the idea of you're going to die, and how do you want to be remembered? What are some of the things that you want to take with you in your? And so I actually did a portrait of them in a coffin with all those items in there, and so the drawing was a position on the gallery wall right next to their questionnaire.
I think that Chicanos began with the traditional Days of the Dead, where you remember those you knew, that you loved, that were your family. But then we moved it to the next level, and we created a genealogy that was beyond the personal. It was a public and collective genealogy. So then I took upon myself to do Dolores Del Rio, because she was this bicultural phenomena. Or someone else would do Rivera, or people would do Posada. Or later when Cesar Chavez died, all over this country. I think it's a healing tradition. I think that it's the healing of the body and the spirit and the inseparability of the two. So I see the Day of the Dead, or the Days of the Dead, as a chance for us to maintain our traditions, but also to cope with the stressors, the losses, the death, the suffering that we go through as a community.
I was intrigued by the Pachuco, and because I also felt there was a mystique also and a mystery there. I think that the one thing that I consciously do in the Pachuco series is to present these characters in a dignified manner. If there's humor, but like I said, there's no condescension there. There's nothing other than a character that, when one of my works is successful, it comes alive as a character.
The reason that Raza got a bad rap about the Pachuco is because La Opinión used to take the same headlines that were in the Herald Express and just write them in Spanish. So our own parents believed the big lie about the Pachucos being all bad. I wanted a historical update so that we can show people that there was a lot of class in being what you guys are calling gangsters or hoodlums. I remember them wanting to show the white man that they weren't lazy, dirty Mexicans, that they could dress as sharp as Clark Gable in Gone with the Wind.
My father tells me about of confrontations on the 4th Street Bridge when you went downtown during the war. When you go against dominant culture, you're doing it for aesthetic reasons, because you look good. The white culture is saying, no, you're defying a convention and you're not towing the line.
For them, it was a matter of showing the world, that they had class, and they still got their ass kicked, the Zoot Suit riots and all of that.
I got the idea of doing a series about Vatos and Pachucos, like I used to see in my barrio in Laredo, in South Texas. They were not the suit-suiter types, although eventually those became part of it. But anyway, I wanted to present these characters in a way that was effective, in a way that was confrontational. And I felt that confrontation was important because, of course, these characters have been reviled in their day, and like they were hoodlums and so on and so forth. That was the perception, an incorrect perception, because a lot of these guys turned out to be good, hardworking people, or even professional doctors, lawyers, what have you.
A Pachuco portfolio. A portfolio of ghosts. For and about La Plebe del West Side, East Side, South Side, Norte. And for and about us of the Cross and the Four Directions. And for Maria Felix y la Ramón, la Dolores, la Gugu, la Tony, la Vicky. Y amores de las calles, los tríos jazz chicano época de los 40s and 50s, a Pachuco portfolio. Y a teoricar acá de este lado, on this side, in Spanish, y en inglés, tiwa, yaqui, y en caló, butitirili, de aquellas. Carnalas y carnales chicas patas por vida bien entacuchaos. Adding style and class to being half-breeds who took their Indianness and Hispanishness and became Chicanos, los nuevos mexicanos. ¡Qué curada! Ser tirilongo era ser chicano, ese cirón, la lalva, trucha y aguzao. Chicano history that can't be denied. And when you make that kind of history, You resent being dehistorified. Últimamente, we are still here. No nos echen la bendición yet. Octavio, peace, brother, didn't get us into his labyrinth and yet was made the nobler for it. ¿Cómo que no nos vamos a curar? Órale, la curada. Heal, yes, Simón que sí. Apachuco portfolio. Thank you. Thank you.
I went to Mexico to study muralism and sculpture. But in Mexico, I saw the ancient Olmec masks. At the same time, I was seeing masks, dance, ritual, and ceremony throughout indigenous villages. And the more I saw the masks, the more I realized the power of the mask. I felt at that time that this was my place as a portrait artist to explore the mask. It was sculpture, painting, music, dance. It was really an art form for me that was alive and breathing.
Traditionally, the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe by the dominant culture has been portrayed as a very submissive figure. According to the ancient legend, the way that she was interpreted originally was not the way we see her today. Originally, she was a 16-year-old young maiden. She spoke in her indigenous language. She was Nahuatl. She was dark-skinned. It was the image of Tonatzin, which was the original mother image of the indigenous people of Mexico.
There are all these claims that she wasn't real, that she was somebody who was created by the Spaniards to get the Indians into line, to get the indigenous people into line. That may or may not have happened. When I saw those early images of the Virgen de Guadalupe, you see her on the banner for Padre Hidalgo. She became a revolutionary. So she went far from being, in a sense, a pawn. She took over her own image and became a revolutionary and defended the people who were given to her. So when I saw Esther's Virgen defendiendo los derechos humanos, I was looking at a new updated version of that same icon. I was looking at somebody who was continuing to fight for her people.
According to art historians, mine was the very first one that sort of, brought her down to earth. But I was always taught that I am a god, that the god is inside of me. So in that way, the goddess is also inside of me. So I think my notion of the transforming the Virgen is sort of like, I am that. That is me. We're all gods. We're all goddesses.
I originally did the Virgin of Guadalupe series when I was looking at media. So I did the first one of myself running because I felt like it needed to have some physical movement. And then I did the image of my mother who worked at the Naval Training Center at a machine shop, which is, at a sewing machine. And I wanted to show her as a working woman. I mean, this is what women do. Part of the problem with the Virgin of Guadalupe being so ubiquitous is that there's no real imagery of Latinas at the work that we do, period. The other one was of my grandmother, which the Virgin of Guadalupe is always this beautiful, young thing, and yet there's no depictions of her as an older woman. And so that's why I did my grandmother.
When I saw the images of people like Esther Hernandez and Yolanda Lopez, especially the images of the Virgen de Guadalupe and in a sense how they updated her, I was very excited. I loved the images.
Sometimes I saw the depiction of the Virgen in these different formats as a little bit shocking. I understood, of course, the intent of the artist, the Chicana artists, and how they were using it. Sometimes I thought it was disrespectful. And for me personally, I don't need to remake the image of the Virgen. Of course, there's images of the Virgen in my paintings because there's the home altars. And there's the image of the Virgen, there's the image of Don Perito Jaramillo. That was my examination of the Virgen Guadalupe, how she was available to us in our home life, in our own community.
I was in an article that was being written for a Mexican magazine, Femme magazine, and the article came out, and the image on the cover was one of Yolanda's Virgenes. There was a bomb threat at the magazine. The magazine offices had to be vacated. I found out about it later.
So I loved it when Yolanda was making those irreverent images, and people stoned the galleries. I mean, they broke the windows at the Galleria, if I remember. And what it did for me is that it made me understand that iconography, that these symbols had enormous power.
I have heard everything from people who wanted to kill me to people who thought that I had changed their life. I had given them something to live for, some hope. And because there's this real interest in the goddess and sort of like digging up those ancient goddesses that were part of all people.
I love the Virgin image, but what if she became something new and different? What about a consummate image of the spirit of the power of what is feminine and Chicana and indigenous? That's what I was trying to do with the Uprising of the Mujeres image. We were making the world over in a vision we had for it ourselves.
My current work, yeah, it came out of my experiences, you know, family outings with the family. We drove all over LA. To drive by car, it was just a lovely experience in the 50s. You know, the highways were open, and I went from the expression of car images to the conveyances, the freeways and the highways that take you places. And in my most recent work, I just had a show. And it's all about, they're just abstractions. They're beautiful curved freeways.
The custom car building really took hold after the Second World War, lowering the cars. That became a feature of lowriders, largely because everybody that were Chicanos began to do that. And you might find examples of people fixing up their cars before that, but not with the intention of being a lowrider and having a cultural affiliation.
It's all about identity. It's all about defiance and identity. These guys would invest so much into the cars, stylize their cars, chop them, chrome them out.
There's a personalization that's taking place to lower your car and have a distinct vehicle. A personalized vehicle that was once a Detroit commercial product and was Chicanoized. An undercurrent psychological factor in lowriding is showing off. Low and slow. It's really a showboat. Lowriders become a cultural chariot, a cultural manifestation of Chicano.
The LACMA show came because the County Museum had already done a show previously with black artists. A group Chicano show would make sense.
Gilbert Lujan, you know, he wanted to bring his painted Chevy into the museum. He thought it would be an interesting statement. And of course it didn't fit in the freight elevator, you know. So we got the front end in. And yes, the first thing you saw as you walked in was this Chevy lowrider image, you know.
I think that the lowrider were just part of what I was exploring to help define Chicano art for myself.
I have chosen to make the cars anthropomorphic because I'm basically a humanist and everything I do is about humans. So I make the car a human being, but for me, making them these cartoon characters is a subterfuge, I think, for something else. This way I could deal with racism in a different way to counter a lot of these anti-Mexican feelings by hiding behind whimsy, color, innocence, folky.
I've always been interested in social dynamics. That's why the Broadway mural. When you're a figurative artist, you're trying to portray us at this time. I'm doing portraits of marginalized people. Some of the car show paintings and pastels that I've done, it's really about the people. But I try to use symbolism in my realistic portrayal. I try to use allegory. It is expressive symbolism.
Carlos chose to do car crashes maybe in the early 80s after Los Four. Part of that was, again, that idea of the car culture. It was a portent of disaster and people getting killed in these giant metal machines.
I think the car crash piece by Carlos Almaraz has become a masterpiece of painting, not just Chicano painting, because it captures the sort of trauma of urban life. On that freeway, always afraid, knowing someday that crash will come. And that flaming car and those beautiful colors that inundate across the freeway, he captures something so totally universal. It is the epitome of urban life.
Well, I started painting in high school. People, I love people. I do a lot of faces. I work well using photographs. I was inspired by the Impressionists. I love the application of paint, colors.
The imagery that you'll see in my work is pretty autobiographical. Music, there was always music. All my uncles were musical, washing the car in the front yard, my grandmother watering our driveway, birthdays, bautismos, funerals.
Today, if a Chicano artist has fame, quote unquote, shows in major galleries or museums, or has that acceptance, what it's done, it's gone beyond our backyard. That is an important step.
We've been struggling for 30 years as artists to be able to survive and to utilize our art for positive social change. So I think it's a great thing for artists to, at this point, be able to realize some financial rewards for what they've created, for this legacy that they're leaving behind.
I think that it is important that Chicano art is in the museums. It's extremely important. The museum world is the power force. It's this, without being in the museums, we are not part of history and part of the dialogue. So that is a given. We need to be there.
I don't think it betrays anything. I don't think it betrays the movement. I don't think it tells us that you've sold out. I think it tells us that we can go beyond.
Some of our first exhibitions, and people would say that our work was not universal enough. I was always very confused by that, you know, because to me, the universality in a work is a work that reaches, that goes beyond boundaries, beyond a race, beyond a city. And our work has always done that. It's always been about the human condition.
We have gone beyond the Chicano art movement. I'll give you a perfect example, Luis Jimenez. Unfortunately, you know, he's passed on, but I mean, he was a master at that. But it wasn't just the image itself, but it's how he interpreted all of that in a very contemporary, very acceptable, universal, to where a museum is going to put it in front of there. But his image came from his Chicanismo.
When you live in the United States, you have the right to self-determination and representation. You pay your taxes. That means the museums and the cultural institutions that take your money have to represent you. Self-determination is your right to create your own galleries, your own centers, your own way of being. But we have to do both.
Yes, we have a larger audience of Hispanics who are now going into museums and galleries and becoming collectors.
But I also think that with that financial reward and that mainstream acceptance comes a big responsibility. You know, for me, that gives me the opportunity to serve my community even better.
We can all still be very active in our communities. If it's not through our work, through fundraisers, through whatever we use our work for, to contribute to that struggle.
I still feel that all of us, no matter who we are and what we're doing, we all have an obligation to make this a better world for ourselves, for our community. We have an obligation to do that.
You know, we still have oppressed people. We have young Chicanos who are going to war.
Chicano art speaks about that population, about our history, about our lives today, and it'll continue to speak about our lives in the future. The Chicano movement did not end in the 70s. It continues on.
A Chicano means something different to me. A Chicano means an attitude. It means that I am seriously involved in trying to bring about change for our community, not just for our community, but for all people who find themselves in the margins of society.
What is the meaning of a life? And how do you work in a life at the center of what you believe and sustain it for a lifetime? That's the big question. And what is the purpose of art if it isn't to transform self and others?